All right, welcome back. I'm excited for this panel. It's our first spotlight of the day, meaning a one-on-one conversation, and it's called the FBI and European Incident Response. And we are very, very fortunate to have with us Efrene Sakilayan. He served for 18 years with the FBI, is one of the most experienced people at the FBI in the European focus and what the FBI is looking at and doing and prioritizing in Europe. He is currently the assistant legal attaché in The Hague in Netherlands, and we're delighted to have Efrene with us. Welcome, Efrene.
Yeah, hi there. Thanks, Bruce.
And moderating today, welcome back to David Lashway. David's been involved in a number of our events, and he's a fantastic moderator and a fantastic resource for this. He's a partner at Sidley. He's based in Washington, D.C., and he's advised organizations on incidents across almost every critical infrastructure sector. He has deep experience in ransomware-related matters and is the perfect moderator. So, David, welcome, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks a lot, Bruce, and thank you, everyone, for joining today. We're really excited and delighted to have a little bit of time from Ren, who's got a very busy schedule, as Bruce indicated. Before we get to the mission and the work, Ren, that you're doing in Europe, on behalf of the FBI and working with various nation states in Europe and throughout the world from this perch as the ALAT. Let's take a quick step back and maybe just start with, what brought you to Europe? As Bruce mentioned, for those of you who are participating today who are not familiar with Ren is one of the long-standing and most capable law enforcement officials that we have in the world associated with not only cybersecurity matters generally, but importantly, critical infrastructure matters. He's walked that careful line between what constitutes a crime in these types of attacks and incidents that we heard about from the first panel, and then all of us in our community that are participating today have been dealing with on a daily basis, and what constitutes a national security matter for a nation state, and the variations between those things and those definitions, and the complexity of non-homogenized legal regimes, and the way the facts manifest in these complex matters. So we're really delighted to have Ren with us. And Ren brings to Europe his leadership on the dark side matter with Continental Pipeline. Ren was the lead for the FBI in that matter from his perch in San Francisco and worked closely with and has deep relationships with FBI headquarters as well as law enforcement around the world. So Ren, let's just start off with maybe a few observations on what brought you to Europe and your perspective from the Continental Pipeline matter and what that meant in the evolution of cybersecurity-related critical infrastructure matters. And then we'll get into the mission set of the FBI in Europe.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. Very kind. It's been a pleasure to have the opportunities that I've had so far, when it's come to cyber investigations. And as you had mentioned, I supervised a squad that was working the dark side investigation when the Colonial Pipeline incident had occurred. Funny little side note here, we had opened the investigation and it was a very quiet kind of group at first. And we didn't, as with many of these cases, we don't ever expect it to be to make too much noise. We didn't realize that it would end up being one of the most significant ransomware attacks that has occurred against the United States. In that particular incident, it was astonishing to see in an incident like that, how many U.S. agencies sort of surge right into that problem and how many eyes need to know or are affected by that one incident. And the FBI was essentially in the middle of those conversations between the victim and the United States government. It was a very enlightening experience for me, but nothing that I had been a stranger to before because I had dealt with many of these types of incidents in the past. But it did highlight sort of and I noticed a sort of change in how the government and how the community now saw ransomware attacks. What once was a nuisance now became a national security risk. And I think being in the middle of that and to see that paradigm shift in that, it was astonishing from my perspective, but it also reinforced things like the importance of working with victims, the importance of our international relationships, the importance of coordinating between agencies, all these things highlighted in one microcosm of a case. So I had an amazing experience, and I hate to say it that way, but an amazing experience in the sense that it really did bring a lot up to the forefront of the public to know that this threat isn't just a nuisance.
One of the things I think you've also highlighted is in that instance, like in all major critical infrastructure related events, in any complex, whether it's ransomware or nation state type attacks across the entire spectrum, collaboration has really been the hallmark. And we've talked a lot about public-private partnerships over the years. We've heard a lot about that. Obviously, we've got a new national security strategy here in the United States that really puts a sharp pencil point on that point. And we're developing, and various European countries are in the process of updating cybersecurity strategies as well. We've got the new NISD 2 directive coming along that's going to drive into that component. But a lot of that collaboration requires words. When we're collaborating, we're using written word and verbal conversations in order to share information and work collaboratively. And now you're on a new mission set where there is a heightened focus on the ability to collaborate in a meaningful way, not only around technical information coming out of incidents, but across non-homogenized regimes, whether they be legal, cultural norms, et cetera. So let's talk a little bit with that experience you had in the background and your deep background in the technical and dealing with, US-based, sovereignty-based nation-state response to a major critical infrastructure attack, and bring that into the new mission set into Europe and what the role is for the FBI in Europe and your counterparties within each of the host member countries, as well as with Europol.
Sure. So prior to this post and prior to my time as supervising a cyber criminal squad in San Francisco, I actually had the pleasure of assuming the same cyber assistant legal attaché role in London. I was there for 3 years. And so that was sort of my first experience working with a foreign partner, and then starting to see how sometimes not aligned, even when it came to the United Kingdom and the United States, you often think, aligned all across the board. But that was my first sort of experience in saying that no, there are differences, right? And how countries will see threats to their country. And when we moved into the Colonial Pipeline incident, it was in the back of my mind, understanding that there are some pieces of evidence that we need that don't exist in the United States. And it's part of working these cyber investigations, the intrusion investigations. Evidence, in a traditional sense, the evidence is not where it would be in a normal criminal case. In a normal criminal case, you can jump in your car and you can get your eyes on a subject, and you can serve subpoenas to your local ISP and get everything that you need. In a cyber investigation, the legal process spans not only borders, but norms, cultural norms, priorities, and oftentimes the wheels of justice do not move very fast. And when you're talking about a cyber investigation and the need to move swiftly, because infrastructure will not stick around very long, we quickly found ourselves, a decade, 2 decades ago, in this mode where going through a mutual legal assistance treaty request that will take approximately 6 months to 12 months for return to get back would not work. Luckily, governments have realized that the cybercrime issue was and continues to be a very significant threat. So I'm very glad that things like the Budapest Convention occurred and continues to occur in updates where there's this attempt to align essentially like our understanding of a threat, as well as the information sharing agreements and capabilities that were laws that we're bringing to the table. Because again, 10, 15, 20 years ago, some countries did not even have laws that addressed cybercrime. And so I bring that all up to say that I move into this role knowing that even in the case like the Colonial Pipeline, or especially in a case, I should say, in Colonial Pipeline, we need that evidence, and we need it pretty quickly in order to address the threat. And it's very dependent on our relationships with these countries. And when I say relationships, I'm talking not just, hey, I know a person and I can get this thing for me. No, this is more understanding some of the minute differences between our legal systems. It may be that, okay, maybe there is an interest in that other country to work on this with us, with their own parallel investigation, using their own authorities. And what you kind of quickly realize is that this whole cybercrime and what's fueling this whole ecosystem is spread all throughout these different countries. And without that collaboration amongst these different countries, I mean, no one country could essentially unilaterally take that all out.
As we think about that, Ren, like how we're organized and the mission set to help perfect that organization model across boundaries, across cultures, across nation states, across rule sets, where we have, you know, a police force in a given country looking at it as a cyber crime, matching against the elements of that crime, seeking to gather evidence in perhaps a parallel investigation, as you mentioned, or in collaboration with your offices or other European-based offices or Africa or Asia Pac. Let's get very tactical for a moment. What's working? From the perch you're in now, you're clearly seeing things that work. You know, we've got some significant challenges ahead. The last panel did a great job of sort of framing some of the larger challenges that we're seeing in the world, the rise of ransomware, with the ransomware task force trying to work on that. We just had meetings with 40 countries here in Washington just a few weeks ago that we participated in. And we're productive in moving ahead, a collaborative approach. Well, we also know we've got elections here in the United States coming up, and we've got elections in Europe that are significant coming up, and around the world, frankly. If we look at a map of the world, 2024 and 2025, into Xi's next election in 2028 in China, we have very significant election-related risks attendant to cybersecurity-related matters as well. What do you think, based on your perch now in our degree of organization around these types of risks, what are we doing well?
Collaboration. I mean, in a sense, I mean, we're working together to understand that there were things out there, and I probably more specific services that are out there that are facilitating a lot of the activity that ends up becoming the ultimate threat that we're facing, whether it's TrickBot, which facilitated a lot of this cyber crime and influence activity, or the Genesis Marketplace, which was taken down by this collaborative effort, or QuackBot, which is botnet that was also facilitating a lot of criminal activity through a series of command and control nodes all throughout the world. And essentially, in order to combat these threats, deobfuscating a lot of the infrastructure or accessing and disrupting the infrastructure that's uniquely placed in some of these countries, again, cannot be unilaterally actioned. And so this collaboration is a huge example of that success, where we all come together and agree that this is our problem, and then we all come to agree that we need to take action on this. It's a wonderful thing to see. Oftentimes it's being coordinated through Europol. And although we're not, the United States is not part of the EU, we work very closely with Europol, much like many other countries that are not part of the EU. And I think that is a great way of highlighting that success, the collaboration and the information sharing across the board.
For the user that is maybe the victim, European-based, US-based, what have you, where we've got a US nexus, how does that introduction occur into your offices or Europol's offices? And then what does collaboration look like between Europol, the member states, FBI, et cetera? Is it just signature sharing and threat intelligence sharing? Is it understanding and mapping the significantly differential legal authorities of the different players and understanding who can do what? Maybe if you could walk us through, I mean, you've given us a great example with Quackbot and TrickBot and other Hive takedowns, other great examples of where European authorities worked collaboratively with your offices and the FBI in order to take direct action to protect companies and individuals throughout the world, beyond the boundaries of the United States or Europe. Maybe a little bit more tactically, how does one enter into that space with you, and then what happens then?
Absolutely. It's important to clarify that the investigations occur in the United States through one of our 56 field offices. But essentially, the cyber, our term is ALAT, the cyber ALATs that are out here, myself included, we essentially are an extension of that case team. So, for example, with Quackbot, our Los Angeles office is the lead on that. I essentially become the extension to that case team. And through my interactions here with our partners, law enforcement, intelligence partners, I build an understanding of what the capabilities are with our partners, what they bring to the table, what unique access that they may have to infrastructure, for example, all these different things that could impact how we ask for information and whether or not we can get it. And all these things, very difficult to do if you didn't have that central point of contact in that particular country to understand that, but also then to see if there's a better way to work with our partners, because in some cases, and what I've noticed quite a bit with a lot of cases that we worked, priorities don't necessarily align when it comes to working internationally. What may be a particular threat, say for example Quackbot, may not be that big of a deal to, say, I don't know, Sudan or something, to us. They are not being affected by it, or maybe they don't have the perception that they are. And so a lot of my job ends up being trying to align those priorities, find something that they prioritize, and see if we can help with that, even if it's not a priority on ours, because we need to try to align this and work as a partnership versus sending a particular request for something, working unilaterally and waiting months for that to come back. It is much more effective for us to have a good understanding, because altruism will only go so far when you're asking for help about something. And so a lot of times I spend a lot of time trying to frame this with our teams to say, hey, look, I understand you need to run your investigation. We swear to protect the U.S. Constitution and the American people and uphold the Constitution. But at the same time, in order for you to do that, you also need to open your aperture and understand what is the worldly impact of this. Because cyber, again, being different from a lot of other threats, very likely touches on many, many other countries. And so it's not just a United States government thing. It does become an international effort. And it's changing that mindset from this is just affecting the United States, and that's all I'm interested in. And now thinking, there are victims here, here, and here, and we need to work with those different governments to understand how we can combat this threat as a team.
One of the things that we've obviously experienced in the United States, and I think your response just highlighted it, is the FBI in the United States has been very proactive in making it clear as a policy matter that for companies and individuals who are the victims of cybercrime, that they are in fact the victims of cybercrime. And you've developed a lot of techniques to engage with those victims as a victim and not treating them as a target or the subject of a criminal investigation, which is your other hat at the FBI and your national security hat on top of that. And you've been very clear as a policy matter. Now, we've also seen regulatory agencies in the United States pick up on regulatory interest, regulatory enforcement, and certainly the White House is driving a policy under the national security strategy in the U.S. that agency sector development on cyber regulation is where we're heading in the U.S. Europe's there. Europe has an advanced cybersecurity and privacy-related regime, as everyone on this call is deeply familiar with, and is it continuing to advance that with two coming out into effect, and we're going to continue to see that with some of the AI and cyber overlap regulatory regimes as well. Is it your experience that that victim status, which has led to a lot of collaboration in the United States with the FBI from victims. Are you seeing that same level of cooperation and collaboration with law enforcement in Europe from victims, or is there a difference there between what's happened in the U.S. versus what's happened in Europe for law enforcement?
Anecdotally, I would say that our partners here in Europe experience a similar challenge that we do in the United States, which is difficulty sometimes, again, aligning with our victims to determine like where we can have a mutually beneficial collaboration when a victim is currently experiencing some type of incident, and I think in to touch on one of the other points that you made about having the national security hat versus and the criminal hat, and obviously with, say, for example, like a financially motivated act, I mean, it certainly it's pretty clear cut most of the time when you're talking about a financially motivated thing. But what if it's a financially motivated act that touches on critical infrastructure? I mean, and those are things that we're exploring right now to try to understand, because the FBI is in a unique place, when compared to a lot of our partners overseas, where we carry both that national security and that criminal investigative load, and it puts us in a unique position to be able to essentially communicate with each other and understand where our authorities end and where they can continue. And there isn't so much of a wall between the two. However, when you work with partners in other countries, you quickly find out that there are unique agencies for intelligence and unique agencies for law enforcement that, again, may not communicate on certain, and maybe it's part of how their government is structured. And so those will also present certain challenges in terms of like if there is an incident that sort of spills between one or the other. And so part of, again, my role out here is to help to understand that, and then react to it with our partners as needed.
What I think we've talked a lot about where we're making progress. Maybe just a minute or two before we wrap up on, what could work better? Where are there opportunities for improvement in that collaborative model between the private sector, the public sector, law enforcement, and across boundaries with law enforcement, where you're on the front lines of that? Are there some opportunities? I think you mentioned one a moment ago, which is recognizing that difference between the national security mission and the law enforcement mission. Are there others?
Yeah, I think I also touched on this a little bit, was alignment of the priorities across different countries, and understanding that coming to an understanding with our different partners, that's an opportunity for us to really impact that threat by aligning and then taking action. That's definitely another point. Information continues to be one of those challenges where there doesn't seem to be a unified final say on how information can or should be shared and how it could be used. And depending on which district that you're working with in the United States, they may or may not be comfortable sharing certain types of materials. Same thing with the victims. Some victims may be more or less willing, and we are only as successful as the information that we get from each other. And I'm not just talking about us and the government, but I'm also talking about governments and the private sector and victims. And that's why one of the things that I always throw out there, and if we talk back to the whole incident response angle to this, I would continue to reiterate that having a plan before the incident occurs tends to be the most beneficial outcome for everyone, even if it means that the agreement is that you're not willing to share. By knowing that up front, that helps, but we strongly prefer that we try to get as much information as possible. But companies, if victims can know that there are certain red lines, that this contains this type of data, that that you already know that up front. We don't have to wait a couple weeks to figure out what that answer is. And then likewise, like for the victim to know this is what law enforcement needs in order to action. Right. And typically those end up being like, where's the infrastructure that targeted your network to begin with? And then we can move through this whole cycle where the field office then receives that information, reaches out to me, who then reaches out to our Dutch partners and that's creates that flow. When there's a slowdown in that communication from the victim to the government and vice versa, that slows down that mechanism that flows, and it just be more efficient if information sharing can be improved.
Thank you for that. Look, I know we're just about out of time, but I'm going to ask you one final quick question with a maybe 5 or 10-second response.
Sure.
Look, throughout the day today, and those of us that are in this space and live it every day, and all of our participants on the phone who are in this space know these are pretty dark times for cyber. We've got projections coming out of the Ransomware Task Force that we're expecting potentially over $25 trillion in cyber crime by 2028. We're seeing an increase in the efficacy and the spread of threat actor groups and the ability to conduct attribution, the challenges of the impact of some of these incidents, and the increase in ransom amounts and all the challenges. We're seeing nation state actors getting more involved, and now AI entering this space to only enhance the efficacy of the offender to the detriment of the defender in this space. Is there anything in your mind, now that you've worked some of the biggest cases and led some of the biggest cases in the US, you're doing that collaborative work that's so essential with your European counterparts, is there anything that we should categorize as we're hopeful about in our space?
I would say yes, because in my experience working with other partners and working on cases, coming out here and continuing the collaborative efforts has made me realize how quickly that all the different countries that are involved in this battle are developing and improving their capabilities and understanding each other much better. Countries are passing more and more laws to help with this fight, and the FBI is opening up our sharing opportunities to the point where it hurts. And I think all of those lead to better capabilities, better outcomes, and I'm excited to see more and more takedowns, more and more arrests, more and more collaboration, more and more disruptions moving into the next couple of years.
Thank you so much, Ren. It was a great opportunity for us to speak with you today. I hope the audience has benefited some from your insights, your experience. I know I have, and thank you for taking the time to join us. Bruce, back to you.
David, well done. And Efrene, thank you so much for joining us, lending us your expertise and what you're seeing. Really helpful. I've gotten a lot of really great feedback already about your panel. So thank you. And we'll see you again soon. And we'll be back in 3 minutes for the next panel.